why you should break the middle of the bar, or the two-level rhythmic parsing rule. So let's talk about this. There's this rule in music notation that you should always break rhythms that show the middle of the bar. Usually when sensible people debate this obviously true and right axiom, they're talking about rhythmic notation in a bar of 4/4 time, and it usually goes something like this. It is common and proper to show the third beat of the bar. I.e., rhythms should be notated in such a way as to make it immediately obvious where the third beat starts, and not to have any rhythmic figuration cross this threshold to avoid metrical obfuscation. Except when it's a half note, but let's not get off track. People often assume this conversation is some arbitrary rule, one which must be followed with absolute diligence. To break it means the engraver ought to be tarred and feathered, drawn and quartered, and their body burned up with the heat of 1,000 suns. However, showing the middle of the bar of 4/4 isn't actually arbitrary, just the most obvious effect of a much more interesting and more nuanced set of rules built right into how music notation works. It's a convention for rhythmic notation that allows for parsing of rhythm to be much easier on the player. The rule is, notes should be grouped together by divisions of the bar no longer than a note length 2 rhythmic levels larger than the smallest note in said group. That sounds super confusing. Let's try and make sense of it. First, I want to establish what it means by 2 rhythmic levels. In music notation, different types of note will take up different lengths of time. These are usually grouped together into beats to build a rhythm, but we're not going to get into that right now. All the different types of notes are related to each other in an exponential binary system of rhythmic durations. Just look. This diagram is at the beginning of every method or theory book ever made. The note lengths range from longest to shortest. At the top we have a whole note. Below that we have half notes, which are, half as long. Then below that we have quarter notes, which are half as long as the half notes, or a quarter of the whole note. And so on. Each additional beam on a black note head will have the value again. Quarters are twice as large as eighths, which are twice as large as sixteenths, which are twice as large as 32nds, which are twice as large as 64ths, which are twice as large as 128ths, which are twice as large as 250.
Anyway,
when the rule mentions rhythmic levels, it just means a specific type of note and then moving 2 levels larger. So when we're concerned with 16th notes, we go 2 levels up to quarter notes. Now, with that prolegomenon out of the way, let's look at this rule in practice. Say we have a whole bar of 4/4 filled with eighth notes. That would be 8 notes altogether. The note length 2 rhythmic levels larger than the eighth note is the half note, which is equivalent to 4 eighth notes. In 4/4 there can only be 2 half notes since an entire bar has 4 beats in it, with each half taking 2 beats. Using this as a starting point for grouping the eighth notes, we can substitute those halves with groups of 4 eighths each. This causes the convenient and happy consequence of an invisible division right in the middle of the bar. Note that it isn't possible to combine just any 4 eighths here. The groups have to respect the divisions of the time signature by the larger note value. So these 4 eighths that span beats 2 and 3 can't be beamed together. The half note divisions of the bar don't fit here as they have to sit on beats 1 and 3. Interestingly, this lines up with the typical strong beats of a measure of 4/4. While I think that helps make this rule even more useful, I don't think that's the reason why it exists or should be followed. In all sorts of music, the sounding meter's beat stress can shift around contrary to the default stress of the written meter, which remains constant. The whole point of written meter and time signatures is to give the musician a consistent framework of breaking up time into beats that are just easily grouped together. Good notation will follow that intuitive grouping. Of course, sometimes it makes sense for the written meter to completely deviate from the time signature and show more clearly the sounding meter when it totally breaks with the written meter, but we're getting off track here. Going 1 level smaller than eighth notes, the same logic applies. Say there are 8 16th notes, then they would be grouped as 4 and 4, since 2 levels up from the 16th note is a quarter note, the same length as 4 16ths. In 4/4 there are 4 quarters available, so those 2 groups of 4 16ths would have to fall exactly within 2 entire beats, If they don't, the groups should be broken up to respect the longer note value. Notice here that the 8/16ths are grouped in groups of 4 as expected, but since they don't fit into the beats of the larger note value, we have to come up with a different solution, namely to group together the middle 4 since they line up exactly with one of the quarter note beats. Note too that if a rhythm contains 16ths at all, the rhythmic figure surrounding those 16ths cannot be combined beyond the quarter note pulse. This is the smallest note provision of the rule we established in the beginning. Take this rhythm of 2/16ths, then an eighth, then another eighth, then 2 more 16ths. We can't just beam these all together, even though they would add up to a half note, which would be 2 levels above the eighths. The groupings must be only quarters, and would have to be written as 2/16ths and an eighth, then the other 2/16ths. This neatly shows the beats of the meter and allows us to parse the 16th notes practically instantly. The whole point of this rule is to show the inherent binary nature of the different levels of note values, and marry it to the concept of the meter, in this case a duple meter. It makes smaller notes much easier to parse when there's a flood of them happening all at once. That 2-level higher thing also does a really good job of limiting the size of groups that the musician has to contend with, because any group for a given rhythmic level is capped at 4 notes. For example, it's much easier to parse 8/16th notes in 2 groups of 4 rather than a single group of 8. It also limits the number of valid combinations of positions for symbols. For instance, a 16th note cannot be followed directly by a half note, since this would break the 16th note level parsing rules. The logical result of these rules is that a half note in 4/4 only has 3 possible locations, on beats 1, 2, or 3, and literally nowhere else. So, if you see a half note, you can use it as an anchor, if you will, for parsing the rest of the bar. Obviously, there are exceptions to these rules, and we haven't even talked about rhythm dots and syncopations, which allow for simplified notation, but let's leave that for another time. As a side note, all this logic applies in triple meters too. You just add another beat to the equation so that the groups are a maximum of 6 notes long. It does make things a little more complicated, but it doesn't cause the system to fall apart. Triple meters have some weird quirks that aren't the most obvious. Let me know down in the comments if you want to see a video breaking down triple meter as well. Let's go through some examples of this rule in practice. Here we have 5/8 notes followed by a quarter. If we beam all 5/8 together, the musician could misread them at a glance, perhaps thinking it's only a group of 4, and then assume the following quarter falls on beat 3. This would be incorrect, since it's actually a syncopated quarter on the and of 3. Given the parsing rule, we can group these 8s up to the size of a half note, or 4/8, and the extra one is given a flag of its own. Here's an example of syncopated quarter notes surrounded by 16ths. We won't get too deep into the syncopated part, because we'll save that for another video. But in between the 2 quarters are 4/16ths. Now, according to the rule, we can group 2 levels higher or a quarter note. Great, so those 4/16ths can now be beamed together, right? Not so fast. The groups must respect the divisions of the bar of the larger value. For our case here, that's quarter notes. Since this is in 4/4, it can be divided into 4 quarter notes, each one on the beat. Pretty straightforward. Then each group must fall within those same groups. Therefore, those 16ths must be broken to allow the first 2 to fall within the beat 2 group and the last 2 to fall within the beat 3 group. Perfect. Now we can write the syncopated quarters as quarters or tied eighths, depending on how strict you get with the syncopation rules. Feel free to fight about that one in the comments. But that's obvious, duh. You just have to break the middle of the bar. Isn't that just a super complicated way of saying the same thing? Yes, but also no, because this logic applies in all sorts of interesting ways that go way beyond the middle of the bar tomfoolery. The point here is to understand the logic and meaning behind the system. Here, look at this example. Remember anchoring? This is a 16th note followed by a quarter note. This is exceptionally difficult to read since the quarter notes are never placed on the quarter beat. I mean, on the E of the beat. I mean, on the 2nd or 4th quartile of the beat. Since the first beat of the measure contains 16th notes, it must be broken up into a group by the parsing rules for 16th notes. So that group should be no longer than a quarter note, which means that the following quarter note gets broken down into smaller notes that are tied together. Notice too how the 16th note at the beginning of beat 3 also gets grouped with the existing 16th notes in the rest of beat 3, making the position of those 16th notes starting on the E of beat 3 much clearer. This is the same reason why notating consecutive dotted 8s in 4/4 is not allowed either. All dotted notes are parsed based on their smallest division, or the amount that the dot adds, so a 16th note for a dotted 8th. This example violates the 16th note level grouping of quarter notes. Colloquially, of course, this is to show all the beats, but the reasoning behind it is far deeper and really has nothing to do with a specific time signature, only the binary system of simple meters. But wait, that music looks way more complicated. Surely the consecutive dotted 8s would be better. No, it may look more complicated on the surface, but it's actually much easier to read since it follows the expectations of the rhythm system that the musicians are fluent in. It's sort of like spelling. You wouldn't spell words in this way in normal writing. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. That's just not right. Here's a really absurd one, but it shows how the logic cascades up the chain of rhythm sizes. The rhythms are beamed incorrectly all over the place, so let's correct that. See how the 16th notes in beat 1 are beamed together? If there were no 30 seconds in that beat, that would be fine, but since there are, it's proper to break the secondary beam in order to show the 8th note pulse here rather than the quarter note pulse, as 8th notes are 2 levels above 30 seconds. Notice too, and this is my favorite, that the primary beam is for the 8th level, and it is still beamed together to show the quarter note beat. By engraving the beams this way, musicians can very quickly parse the rhythm and find out where all those itty-bitty notes lie in the measure without thinking too hard. Let's throw in some 64ths into the mix just for fun. That double dotted note is completely in the wrong place. It has to be broken up into a few tied notes. Notice how in beat 2 with the 64th notes, there's actually 2 secondary beams. This way the 8th note divisions of the 30 seconds are still respected, while the 16th note divisions of the 64ths are also respected. If you follow the top level beam of this rhythm, you can easily see where the quarter note pulse is at all times, and the 8th note pulse for that matter, by following the double beams. In fact, here's the complete system all in one image, from whole to 128th notes, or 5 beams. You can see how a single beam indicates the secondary grouping at the correct position for 8th notes at 32nd notes and smaller. 64th notes not only have secondary but tertiary groupings, with the 2 beams showing the 16th note groups, and 128th notes have quaternary groupings to show 32nd notes. Notice too that for quarters and halves, which have no beams, they still have a visual definition that is fundamentally equivalent to beams, that is, the color of the note head. You can easily pretend that there was an invisible beam for those levels as well, and it cascades up the list just like all the others. It is an ingenious system that musicians learn when reading music, and it never is really explained, probably because few teachers would be able to articulate it. Even most music engravers wouldn't be able to. It really is remarkable that this system is so logical and neat. Gould knows not everything in music notation is. All this is to say, using this system of rhythmic parsing correctly and consistently is of the utmost importance in your engraving. It's one of the most fundamental elements of music notation that musicians will look at a lot. And if they easily parse your rhythms, they will learn to trust your notation and not second guess themselves. Thanks for watching this music engraving tip. Did you know about the rationale behind rhythmic parsing before? Let us know in the comments. If you liked what you saw or you feel you learned something, be sure to hit that like button. For more videos, be sure to subscribe and smash that bell. I made it a point to make more videos for this channel, but it takes a lot of time and effort on my part. If you would like to help support these videos and the Music Engraving Tips group in general, head over to our Patreon page. Thank you.